Good afternoon and welcome. I am Cassidy Obula with the Center for Optimizing Rural Health. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on Strategic Planning 101. Before I introduce our speaker, I do have a couple of announcements. We are recording this webinar and we will be posting it to our website along with the slides within about 48 hours. You will receive an email from CORE with a link once that's been posted. You'll also have a survey link in that email. It takes about 60 seconds and we'll be posting it in the chat today as well. If you have questions during the webinar and you would like to go ahead and post them in the chat box, we do encourage you to do that. However, there will be time for Q&A after the presentation, and I'll make sure that Dr. Pace addresses any questions in the chat. You also have the option to unmute yourself at that time as well. So it is now my privilege to introduce Dr. Michael Pace, who is our presenter today. Dr. Pace is a project management expert with over 2 decades of experience in project, program, and portfolio management functions across a diverse set of clients, including financial institutions, government agencies, biotech firms, and telecommunication companies. He's delivered keynotes, workshops, and training worldwide on project management, especially on method customization. He's written several books and articles on project management and founded a boutique consulting firm, Diverging Roads. He holds certifications in project and portfolio management, leadership, cultural intelligence, and sustainability. In addition to his work at Mays Business School, Dr. Pace is a faculty affiliate at Texas A&M's Energy Institute, where he teaches graduate level project and project portfolio management courses for the energy sector. At Mays, he teaches project management, strategy, entrepreneurship, and managing sustainable business. Dr. Pace leads study abroad programs to multiple locations with the goal to teach on each continent. Dr. Pace is president of IPMA USA and the faculty advisor of Phi Beta Lambda Business Fraternity. So it is all yours, Dr. Pace. But before you get started, I just have one question for you. How many continents have you taught on so far?
5 out of the 7.
Oh, wow.
I was this close to Antarctica, and the trip didn't make, so I'm almost there.
Awesome. Well, it is all yours. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate y'all's time today. I personally don't like listening to my own bio, so I'm glad that y'all were willing to sit through that. To jump right into what we're going to talk about today, the core team asked me to talk a little bit about just what is strategic planning, and we'll look high level at what it is and the benefits and some of the risks of doing it and doing it poorly. We'll look at what the elements of strategic planning really are and how to do it from a tools and processes perspective. And then we'll kind of end our discussion with how do you execute the strategic plan. Cassidy mentioned a lot of things, project management. There's a triangle about strategic planning. You have to have a strategy, then you have to do it. That's the execution phase, and that's all about projects. So strategies give way to projects. Projects help make better decisions. Better decision feeds into strategy. So there's a triangle there. So we'll kind of walk through this a little bit at a time. I believe I've done my math correctly, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. So if anything comes up during just type it in the chat. Cassidy can help me keep track of that, and we'll go through questions at the end. So when we, she did that, good. We don't have to waste time with that. So when we say strategic planning, it is a drastically overcomplicated thing that ends up with pictures like this. That if you were to look at it, it would be very daunting, and you probably pay a consultant way too much money to try to make sense of it. In essence, what we're trying to do is determine a vision for what our company, our firm, in our case here, our hospital or our hospital system, what do we want the future to look like? Simon Sinek does a great job of positioning things like having a just cause. Other authors will say things like, what do we want the world to look like when we're done with it? So having that vision for where our firm is going and where our organization is going is step one. And then we start building back from that. How are we going to accomplish that vision for the future? So that's the root of it. Where are we now and where are we headed? We determine what are some major goals that help us accomplish that vision. As we figure out what our goals are, we build metrics and targets to measure progress and to see how we're doing from a success perspective. We create projects to hit those targets, to accomplish those goals. And then at the end, hopefully we have success that we can measure against, and we keep moving the needle forward a little bit. In a drastically more simplified version, strategic planning involves an analysis of what you do well and what you don't do so well, analysis of what's going on outside of your firm, analysis of internal and external factors that could present challenges that you should address or opportunities that you should exploit. And then based on that analysis, you make decisions. What should we do? What shouldn't we do? What makes sense for our organization to continue to do? What should we start doing? What should we stop doing? And then once we make those decisions, we implement them, which sounds like the easiest of the three, but that's probably the most difficult, because thinking about things is great. Doing them is slightly more complicated. So in a picture format, vision and mission give us this gap between the future, that's our vision statement, and the mission, where we are today. And strategic planning is noticing first that there's a gap, and then figuring out how we're going to actually fill that gap. Now, I don't know if anyone else happens to be a Disney fan. My wife and I are Disney fanatics. My kids have inherited that trait. And I think Alice in Wonderland, even though it's not Disney, I'm going to claim it as Disney, has a great quote that really emphasizes why this matters. I refuse to read to students. I won't read to anybody else here. But the idea here is, if you don't know where you're going, then it doesn't matter what road you take to get there. As the Cheshire Cat says, then it doesn't matter. There's the punchline of the joke. And it's, if you don't know where you're going, if you don't have a vision for where your organization wants to be in the future, then there's no point in strategic planning. There's no point in going through project management. You're just kind of keeping the lights on. From a why would we do this perspective, there have been lots of studies over the last 4 or 5 decades that look at this idea of strategic planning. The punchline of all of those research papers is strategic planning has a positive, moderate, and significant impact on organizational performance, which is just to say that doing it is better. In fact, doing something is better than doing nothing most of the time. There seems to be consensus at 3 main areas of why you should do this. The first is generalized as planning is good. Being a proactive organization versus a reactive organization allows you to be more efficient and effective with your limited amount of resources. We have lots of things we want to do, and we can't do everything. So how do we pick and choose? Well, if we have a strategic plan to do that, then this helps us with that. It also is a great communication tool so that we can show all of our team members, all our employees, from the top down of our organization, what expectations there are for us. Where's the organization going? What are the behaviors that we're going to allow to help us do that? That helps retain staff. Having a clear vision, having a purpose has actually been shown to help with this recruitment, especially as we talk about millennial and centennial generations. The organization having a purpose and setting a clear expectation is key to retaining good people. It also helps build trust. By having trust, it allows us to engage in conflict management, and it allows us to deal with issues in a safe way. It also is just a great communication tool. This is what we're doing. This is what's important. This is what is less important, and figuring that out. And then at the end of the day, having a strategic plan helps us with better decision making. We all suffer from what I call shiny object syndrome, where we see something out there and we think that's a great idea, and then buyer's remorse kind of sets in, and we realize that it wasn't the best decision to make. So let's use data, let's do metrics, have targets, KPIs, OKRs, all the 3-letter acronyms that you want to throw out there to help us make better decisions. But the thing here is we have to be careful that we focus on the right things. The quote from Steve Jobs is that people think focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on. And that's a great thing for a strategic plan, but that's really not the whole thing. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that are. You have to pick carefully. And that's the problem with strategic planning when it goes haywire. Depending on the study, lots of strategic plans fail. The statistics kind of vary. Why do they fail? Well, for it to work, strategic plans have to be focused and manageable. Do what you're good at, figure out what you're good at, build on the strengths, try to fix the weaknesses, but have a clear focus on what you're trying to accomplish. Do it within a certain amount of time at 6, 12, 18 months, maybe a 3-year plan. Don't worry about too much from that. For example, for this one, I had a client who wanted to build out a 5-year plan. And I said, it's 23 right now. In fall of 24, we've got a presidential election. I don't care what party you're voting for. Whatever you're planning for after that doesn't matter. I mean, it's going to change so quickly. So be focused on what the time span is even. Strategic plans, if done poorly, can be incredibly complex. Now, strategy is complicated. Executing strategy is complicated, but you don't have to make it needlessly complex. So make sure that everyone knows what's expected of them, what they should do, what they can't do, so that they can carry it out. If they don't know what's expected, and if they don't know what the goal is, it's hard to meet that expectation. And then basing your strategy on guesswork fairly often leads to failure. Are you using good data or using insufficient data? We have all types of cognitive biases that we deal with. The list I found showed 188 different cognitive biases that we suffer from. And it's just, we are constantly being bombarded with information. I imagine at least one of you is probably a psychology expert, and so I will not try to get into the science of that, but from a management perspective and from a strategy perspective, we can make really bad decisions. So using data is good to help us prevent that. But if we use bad data, we don't use it at all, our strategy goes haywire. Or we could talk about, we don't know what we're doing. Or we could talk about very reactive organizations. We're always in crisis and we don't ever have the time for being proactive. Or we don't want to, we think we know what we're doing. We don't know what we're doing. Or we've had a bad experience, or dot. Yeah. So there's lots of ways this can go haywire, but it doesn't have to be. So let's kind of take apart our process here, and we'll go kind of step by step of how we might go about engaging in strategic planning in a structured and semi-uncomplicated way. It always starts with a firm foundation. That foundation is a vision for what you're trying to accomplish. Vision statements are the underlying focus for all strategic plans. They should be brief, they should be clear and concise. The last study I showed that the average American reading level is around 5th or 6th grade, which hopefully that's present company excluded from that study. But if we're trying to engage all of our team, which this has to be, we need to dumb it down, make it fit on a t-shirt, make it inspiring, make it challenging. That's harder done than said, right? It's easy to say it should be brief and concise. It's very hard to say what a real good vision statement is. A mission statement is how you're going to get to that execution phase. So if we say our vision is to be the world's leading healthcare provider in our state, how are we going to do that? Well, we'll accomplish that through outstanding patient care. We'll have the best providers on staff. We'll work to be a network with as many insurance carriers as possible. And then values are those core behaviors, those core norms that are expected of all of our teams. If we say that we're going to be the best in patient care, we better have customer service listed as a core value. And everyone needs to understand that we should be really good at talking to our customers. There's a big difference when I go to Disney World at customer service versus when I go to Walmart and have customer service. And so what is expected of us from a values perspective will determine how things get implemented with our strategic plan. So that firm foundation is key, because without that, we don't know where we're headed. Now, the next stop, as we look at our strategic plan and how we go about doing it, is to look at the external environment around us. Technically speaking, there are multiple layers of this environment. The outermost layer is called the general or the macro layer. That builds into what's called the industry. That builds into what's called the task environment. The differences in these layers is what's called locus of control. That task environment is us and our competitors, us and our customers. It's us and our day-to-day interactions. And we have a lot of influence and a lot of control over what happens in that task layer at the very center of our circle. But as we go further and further and further away from that center, we lose control. In fact, at the general level, we have very little agency. We are going to be influenced by things and not do a whole lot of influencing back. People are going to have opinions, sociocultural trends are going to emerge, laws may be passed, and we kind of just deal with them. We're going to look for awareness. Within the industry environment, that's all about how are we different from our competitors? How are we going to be competitive? How likely is that advantage over our competitors going to be? And then that task environment, again, is where we finally get to that level of control. When we look at these different levels, we have different tools and frameworks that we can utilize. Looking at the generalmost layer, that macro environment, the typical tools called PESTLE. There are multiple acronyms involved: PESTLE, STEEPLE, STEEP, ESTEP. You could throw a stick and probably find an acronym for what you use here. Generally, it's the same six-ish domains that are covered in this: political, economic, sociocultural, technological, environment, and legal. When I teach this, I normally combine political and legal because there's a whole lot of overlap, and kids, students like to worry about what bucket it falls in. None of these are very important about what the bucket is. It's more about an awareness of trends within these domains that might cause a challenge or cause a problem for our organization that we should deal with. For example, diversity, equity, inclusion is a hot button topic again, and you could fit in that with a sociocultural trend and say, socioculturally, people want to be treated with respect. Socioculturally, there are lots of opinions on what is better, equity versus equality. We could say, well, politically, there are things going on in the political spectrum involving DEI that would, we could have this policy, we can't have this policy. If we have a policy, it relates to funding in this way. We could say DEI has a legal ramification. So if I have this policy, I might be sued. If I have this other policy, I might be sued a different way. So just this one idea of DEI can fit into multiple buckets. Each of the ideas covered here, political, economic, sociocultural, technological, environmental, and legal, is just a kind of a domain to ask questions about what could be going on in the broad environment that's going to impact everybody, that we should just be aware of, so that if we need to launch a project to deal with it, we can do just that. The next layer, as we get closer to our locus of control, is called Porter's 5 Forces. Back in the 80s, Michael Porter was a very prolific researcher in strategy, and he came up with multiple tools and frameworks. This one caught his name with it. It's the idea of looking at our our industry environment. How attractive is our industry? And back in the 80s, attractiveness was really defined as our ability to have above average returns, our ability to be competitive, our ability to stay in business, really. And Porter's 5 Forces, I usually outline as a 5-sided shape because there's 5 of them. That makes sense. The topmost is threats of new entrants. We want stability. Industries that are stable help us be competitive because we know what to expect and who to expect it from. Threat of new entrants means, can people jump into this industry that we don't know about yet? Can newcomers come in and make waves? So the higher the threat of new entrants, the less stable our our industry is. And so we have to kind of prep for that. And there are lots of barriers to entry that would help us define the threat of new entrants and that specific measurement there. The next, as we kind of go clockwise around our pentagon, is bargaining power of suppliers. And what students normally get hung up with is a specific supplier, but what we're talking about is industry-wide. If we need aluminum, how many suppliers of aluminum are they, and do they all act in concert with each other? If they all raise their prices, can we do anything about it? Because if they do, we have to deal with it. So we have to plan for that. If we all need, my wife was just mentioning yesterday, Adderall. There's an Adderall shortage, and I know that there's lots of drug shortages happening right now, probably from COVID coming forward and just the different supply chain and workload issues. If there's a company that prescribes that manufactures a medication, they have a lot of power. If they stop making it, if they're slow making it, we just deal with it and suffer through. And that determines that level of stability that we have. If suppliers can kind of raise prices, or if suppliers can lower the quality of their supplies and we can't do anything about it, that's going to determine our ability to remain competitive. As we continue around the circle, bargaining power of buyers looks at our customers. Now, it's kind of harsh to say, but we really don't want our customers to have much power, because they can exercise that power by switching to a different competitor. So if they don't like me, they can go to Cassidy. If they don't like Cassidy, they come back to me and they can swap back and forth. We want them to stay with us. We want to engender loyalty. We want to keep them coming back to us. So we look to see, are there things that would help keep them around? Are there a lot of customers? Are there a lot of choices that they have? That leads into threat of substitution. How hard is it for a customer to substitute our product, good, or service between us and a competitor? We want loyalty. We want differences. We want to prove that we're different or better than everybody else in some way. When we look at hospital systems and healthcare, a lot of the time we see customer service as a key differentiator. We treat our customers with respect. We communicate at an insane amount. If you've got an app, it's a easy to use app, and we're not being confused and frustrated. On a personal note, every time I go see my doctor, they complain about their what's it called? Their healthcare system used to be called EHR, and I think it's been renamed to something else. So every time I go, EHR is bad. It takes 10 minutes to check me in for the doctor. Well, that kind of fits here. Is it easier for me to go somewhere else, because that represents a pain point? And the last one of these 5 forces is the intensity of rivalry. Do all of our competitors, do they fight each other tooth and nail for the same amount of customers? Tooth and nail is not a good type of fight. We don't want Anchorman style parking lot brawls because we want stability. We want to all get along. We don't want no competition, because a little bit of competition helps us stay on top of things, but we want to at least get along with each other. So we look at things like exit barriers and industry growth or stagnation, and help us determine again what that looks like. And we look at that holistically. What do all 5 of them say as far as how stable is this industry going to be for us? We combine all of those pieces of information with a SWOT diagram. Hopefully y'all all done SWOTs before. From a technical perspective, because this is falling within the looking outside of our organization, it would just be the OT. But that sounds really weird when you're doing a webinar to just do the OT, and then we'll cover the SWOT later. Strengths and weaknesses are positive things, or excuse me, our internal locus of control. We control our strengths, we control our weaknesses. O and T, opportunities and threats, represents external things we don't have a whole lot of control over. S and O, the first column, represents things that we're good at. W and T, the weaknesses and threat, represent things that are bad. So strengths would be a resource that we're really good at. We're really good at marketing. We're really good at patient care. A weakness might be something that we're not good at. Recruiting and retaining staff, marketing, it kind of depends on what's going on with your organization. Opportunities typically begin with new product campaigns, new marketing campaigns, doing something new, cool, and awesome that we don't do already. And then threats represent things that are outside of us that could damage us, competitors, public perception if we're not careful. So what do we do with all of this information? It gives us just information, and it's a lot of it. Well, PESTLE is what trends should be aware of. What's out there that we need to just notice. 5 forces tell us how likely we are to be competitive. SWOT tells us our threats and opportunities we should either exploit or try to mitigate. And so we start creating goals, projects, tactics to deal with these specific factors that we've identified. Are there any big red flags that jump out that say we have to do something? So I mentioned DEI, that's the big hot button topic. So if there is a giant sociocultural trend that says we want diversity, equity, and inclusion to be on your website, well, we launch a project to add that. Or if we happen to be in a different state and they say DEI represents a challenge, you can't have that, well, that would be a project to take it off our website. We combine all the stuff going on outside of our company with the things that we're good at internally. We start off and we look at what's called our core competencies. What are we good at? Generally speaking, the rainbow here is a good kind of anchoring point. We talk about tangible and intangible resources. Organizationally, what's our organizational structure and design look like? Are we incredibly bureaucratic? Do we have a lot of silos, or are we good with making decisions? Are we very communicative? Do we have a good structure for things? We can look at our physical resources. That could be our building. It could be everything that's in the building. If your hospital system, your clinic is older, maybe it's time for a fresh paint job, that would fit here as something that would be analyzed. Financial resources includes the amount of cash we have, but it also includes our ability to borrow. And so credit would fall under there. We would want to analyze both cash on hand, but also the ability to borrow in case we needed like a capital campaign. We wanted to build a new clinic. We wanted to get a new x-ray machine, that kind of thing. Technological resources for us in the healthcare space is going to be anything involved delivering our product, good, or service to our clients. So we think computer chips and desktops and workstations on all of that stuff. And yes, absolutely. How do your patients check in? What's the EMR, HR system going to look like? But all the way up to what kind of instrumentation do y'all have? And is it the state of the art? If we're going to say that we're customer friendly, patient centric, state of the art, then our technological resources should match up with that. Human resources, I really hate the naming of it because no human ever wants to be called a resource, but human resources are the people within your teams. Do they trust each other is probably the most important thing to think about. If you don't have trust, you're not getting much else. But look, what's the knowledge, skills, abilities that they maintain, right? So it's one thing to know what you're supposed to do and not be able to do it. And then there's that gradient of knowledge, skills, abilities that I'm able to do the job. I can teach others to do the job. I'm an expert at this thing. Innovation is all about how can we be creative? How can we think outside the box? How good are we at that? And then reputation is what do other people think about us? Have you been on Yelp lately to see what they think about your hospital system? Or how many Glassdoor reviews are there about y'all and how your interview processes go? So you have to be careful with reputational resources because the people who are going on to post things online either really, really love you or really, really hate you. And there's survey bias that happens in the middle. After we figure out what the resources are that we're playing with, we want to ask ourselves, are we different than everyone else? Because if our resources can be copied by everybody else, that's not distinct. That's not good for us. Because if it can be copied, they're going to do it as well. All our competitors, everybody else in our industry. The official framework is called VRIO. And we use VRIO to define, do we have a sustainable competitive advantage? So no advantage is permanent. What we hope for is a long-lasting one. And we do that by having resources that are able to take advantage of all of those opportunities and threats. If we have resources that can't do the simple things like opportunities and threats, it's called a competitive disadvantage. We need to start there, fix our resources, upskill our employees, train them on new skills, get them engaged in a new way, look at our organizational culture. Why are they not motivated? That kind of thing. If they are valuable, are they rare? Are they possessed by one or few others? Because if everybody does the exact same thing, that's really easy to substitute. So if I can swap back and forth, I probably will. So I want to figure out how I can be different. If I'm not different, the official terminology is called competitive parity. It's kind of like the idea that I could go to McDonald's for nuggets, or I can go to Burger King for nuggets, or I can go to Wendy's for nuggets, and they're almost chicken, right? They're all pretty much the same. So once we figure out that we're different in some way, we want to make it hard to copy. And I'm not really sure who was cruel enough to say inimitable, because that's really hard to say on a webinar, let alone in a class over and over and over again. But the I stands for inimitable. And it means we want our resources to be hard to copy. Now, skills are easy to copy. What we want to look for is, are there processes that we could trademark or copyright? Are there things that we can make good decision over and over and over again and just make it kind of complicated? They can't figure out how we got to this point. We're going to want to try to protect our resources and their ability to do things any way we can. After that, that's kind of the low-level resources. We want to look with the O at our top-level resources. The CEO, the board of directors, the board of trustees, whatever, the C-suite in general. Are y'all good at making decisions? Because if you're not, we have an unused or a limited competitive advantage. If the C-suite is not capable of making good decisions in a fast and efficient and effective manner, we are going to be successful in spite of, not because of them. And so we have to take a long, hard look, some kind of critical self-reflection to say, we the problem. So if we're not the problem and we've got everything else lined up, it's sad to say a sustainable competitive advantage. So we maintain that kind of perspective on our resources. Now, a good friend of mine, David Flint, wrote the book about some of this information, and he adds the idea that it's important to recognize nothing is permanent. That includes our ability to maintain these resources as being valuable, rare, and inimitable. He says there are eroding factors and enabling factors. Eroding factors, when we look at that analysis, says let's take those resources, let's figure out what it will take to break those down. What would make our staff leave? What will increase our turnover rate? What would make our skills go out of date and become obsolete? We want to fight obsolescence if at all possible. And so the eroding and enabling factors is about analyzing what can chip away our advantage and what can we do to prevent that or slow it down. So external said, okay, here are all the things we should deal with. Exploit opportunities, neutralize threats is kind of the buzzwords, but it's what should we deal with, kind of big picture. This section of resources, competencies, VRAO, erosion, enabling factors, what we're going to look for are projects that help build us up. The other is more about going out and protecting ourselves from competitors, or going out and protecting ourselves from external threats. But this is about helping our internal side of our business, of our hospital system. How can we upskill and improve things? Now, to drastically simplify our options, well, we're going to launch these projects and it has to tie in with our strategy. Well, we can have multiple different types of strategies. At the kind of generic base level, our product, good, or service is called a business level strategy. We can either choose to be really, really efficient. And by being really, really efficient, we're cheaper than everyone else. McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's fits this bill, Walmart. By being cheap, the people will come back to us because we're cheap. They come back to us because we're efficient. The other option is called product differentiation. People don't come to us because they're cheap. They come to us because we're good. Walmart versus Target kind of triggers this. There are plenty of opportunities that, I could go buy a cheap laptop, or I can spend a lot of money on a shiny piece of aluminum that has an apple on the back of it, right? So they're the exact same thing, but they will convince us that there's higher quality and it's worth a premium price. I would argue that from a healthcare perspective, most of us lean toward product differentiation. We have to tell our customers that we're better than others. You should come to us because you're going to get the best care possible. And then you have to figure out how to accomplish that. Now, that's business level. It's all about delivering a product, delivering a service. You can think corporate level, which is big picture. Stability means that things calm down after you make a big action. The big actions include growing. It can be new products, new markets. It can be taking over other companies. It can include getting into lines of business that are related to what we're doing, or it could be getting into business that we don't know what we're doing yet, but we can at least take advantage of some key resources. If you're a hospital system that focuses mainly on family care, maybe pediatric care, and having a specialty there, that would technically fall under this growth strategy as you're trying to do a new product, pediatrics, in a new market. You also can do shrinking strategies. Maybe we bite off more than we can chew, and we need to shrink back down to be more efficient, to be more effective in what we're doing. So that's what we're seeing a lot with on the news right now. All of these companies announcing layoffs. Just as an aside, I'll tell you that my personal opinion is there's no reason to have layoffs. We should try to avoid those at all costs. It damages morale, it damages productivity, it damages trust, or just destroys that. There are companies out there that I have read about that have never done layoffs in their entire corporate history. And they do that through advanced strategic planning and by upskilling and transitioning employees wherever possible. Now, COVID happens and we're all stuck inside. Yeah, that's a unique situation. But in general, as we look at some of these companies that just grew too big too fast, and now they don't know what to do with all these employees, that's an element of strategic planning that we could think about. There's also cooperative strategies. Not everything has to be a competition. From the game theory perspective, what we find out is if we all work together, we all win. And so building out networks or building out alliances can be a form of strategy for us. Normally on a strategic plan, we put this into implementation through something called a balanced scorecard. Now, if we look at 1400's accounting principles, that's where we get the phrase, the bottom line, or the terminology, the bottom line. And it has to do with, we want to make a profit. I'm all for making a profit. My kids like to eat. My wife likes the house. So I'm all for capitalism, but it's not the only perspective. And so the balance here that is being referenced is financial is absolutely critical, but it's only one of four perspectives that we should carry. Financial, customers, internal processes, and education and growth are the other, kind of completes the circle. Now, if I'm trying to predict the future, I would say within the next 5 to 7 years, the balanced scorecard will include things like sustainability. They'll include things like climate change, DEI, employer rights. I don't think this is going to be around unchanged for very much longer. So financial is all things ROI, cash flow, financial results. So we have to factor that in. Even for a nonprofit organization, we need to bring in enough money to keep the lights on in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Customer relationships are all about knowing who our customers are and are they satisfied with us. We want to maintain the customers because it's cheaper to have an existing customer that likes us than to try to attract a new one. We want to look at our internal processes, and we want to be we don't have to be lean. We don't have to be the most efficient on the planet, but we don't want to be wasteful. We don't want to just sit around with waste that doesn't make sense to have. And then we look at our internal processes from a professional perspective of do our employees like working here? What's our retention and recruitment rate? What are the job satisfaction numbers? What's our employee turnover? What's our the skill level and the training knowledge? And we kind of factor that in. It usually turns into a report that looks like this. This is from a website there called IntraFocus. This is what's called a strategy map, where it takes our balanced scorecard and it says for this element, this perspective, we have specific measures. For those measures, we have targets that we're trying to hit. In order to hit that target for that measure, here's a project or two that we're trying to accomplish. And we remind ourselves all the time of what the vision is of what we're trying to do. Which again, it's really easy to go through this in about 37 minutes and say, these are all the things that we should think about. And then this is what will get printed out at the end of the day. It's a lot harder to actually go into the business of actually getting this accomplished. Now, I will tell you that through CORE, they have strategic planning resources that I am sure that Cassidy and Melissa and whoever else for the CORE team are available would be more than happy to tell you about. I am not a good salesman, so I'll just tell you I know they exist. And if you are interested in that, we can talk about that. Now, to be mindful of your time, I'm slightly faster than I expected, but I don't usually, people don't complain when I give them time back to their day. Now, if you're interested in anything from CORE, Melissa Lackey is in my point of contact there from a strategic planning perspective. And so there's her contact information. If you want to reach out to me, that's my email address, and that's a QR code to my LinkedIn profile. I'm happy to connect with you. And Cassidy, I will turn it back over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Pace. So now would be your opportunity to either unmute yourself to ask a question or type something into the chat box. The default is that it goes out to everyone and you can just ask your question there and I'll see that. Or if you would rather just click that drop down box or drop down arrow next to everyone and find my name, Cassidy Avila, then that would go directly to me and I would be happy to ask that question anonymously on your behalf. So we'll give you a few minutes to do that because I do have one question here for you, Dr. Pace, and I'll make a few announcements before we adjourn. So you have time to kind of formulate your question. So the question I have is a good one. I think that when we think about a lot of our hospital meetings and conversations, that this could be so many rural hospitals. But the question is, what's the biggest way to involve a governing board in a strategic plan when the board is made up of elected people that don't have an understanding of healthcare and spend maybe 1 to 2 hours a month with the facility?
Well, we've been together for about 39 minutes, so I'll call our friends and I'll tell you that you should do it at arm's length. And I say that as someone who has suffered through this, right? You have to involve your board. I'm not saying don't, but if they don't know all the ins and outs, you have to be careful at the level of involvement. It is so much more critical to get your team members who are in the weeds doing this bought into it. So what you might have is kind of this broad survey that goes out to everybody. And then maybe you have focus groups that include board of directors and then middle managers, and then all the way down to hourly employees. So tackling it at all levels, and then weighing what the information you get back as appropriate. Because, the board of directors is great people, but if they're not in the building doing the things at all times, they're not going to give us the great detail on resources. Now, they may help us set a strategy for like a vision. This is what we want the hospital to be at in 5, 10, 15 years. And that's great. And we should focus them on their strengths, focusing on that future. But we should be very careful about letting them, again, it's about using good data, right? So use the data that's closer to the source would kind of be the way that I would non-politically correctly state that.
Excellent, thank you. I don't see any other questions coming through on the chat. So I will go ahead and make a couple of announcements and then check back again before we dismiss. I just dropped a link into the chat box. It's about a 60-second survey from CORE just on this webinar and then what you might like to see in the future. So that's really helpful as we want to provide things that are relevant to you guys. And as I said earlier, we will send out the recording of this presentation as well as the slides that you can download from our website. That takes about 1 to 2 days. Following this presentation, you'll get that from CORE. And looks like we do have something in the chat. So someone said, the balanced scorecard makes sense, but most CEOs are incentivized by finance generally. So just kind of a comment, I guess.
Yes. Kind of more complicated than that. That's kind of, I'll give you my personal opinion. Your mileage may vary. As you look at 70s, 80s, 90s business schools, MBA programs, kind of this thinking, profit was the end all be all of the world. Finances were everything. And I think what we're seeing more generally in 2023 is the idea that that's not. And I get the two guys mixed up because they have very similar names and they both talked about stakeholder theory. One is Friedman and one is Freeman. One had a beard, one was bald. It's very odd. They talk about the same thing very, very closely. One says a company exists, even a hospital exists for profit for others. In this shareholders, trustees, whatever your ownership structure is. The other guy comes in a couple of decades later and says, no. We have an obligation to provide values to stakeholders, this broad section of of everybody who's influenced by or impacted by what we do. And if we do that well, we get financial profit at the back end. And we see this with companies like Patagonia. Just last fall, they made a lot of noise and how it was a family-owned company. They donated their shares of the company from themselves to a kind of an environmental trust to take better care of the environment. And people were really excited about that. We see this the sociocultural trend that more and more people will buy from companies that stand for something, that there's a broader purpose, that then for everyone who's out for themselves or for the quick dollar. And what I've cautioned clients in the past about doing is, if that's your only goal, if you only ever think about money, that's going to be the core vision that you put forward. That's going to be the core value that everyone holds you to. Everything's all about the almighty dollar. And so you have to be really careful about that. So kind of how do you deal with it? CEOs do this. It's kind of inherent in the DNA a lot of times. That's the benefit of involving external people to come in that say, hey, even if you're not hiring a consultant, if you're just looking at different resources and getting someone who's not involved with your hospital system right now to come in and be the bad guy, to be the voice of reason that doesn't have a horse in the race, so to speak, to say, maybe you're being slightly myopic and you should expand your horizons. The balanced scorecard, like I said, attempts to say just that. Finance is one of 4 areas that we look at, but you can't sacrifice customers for finance. You can't sacrifice your employees for finance. And like I said, I don't think it's going to stay just those for much longer. I would, within 5 to 10 years, it's going to be drastically different. Now, it's not a hospital system, but what we're seeing right now with some firms is just this. Home Depot announced 3 weeks ago $1 billion investment in upskilling its employees because they're worried about losing skilled workers. And it's easy to say, well, if we'll just hire someone new, but there's a worker shortage. There's all kinds of problems socioculturally, not problems, interesting trends, we'll say, about people want to work for a company, a hospital, a clinic. It doesn't matter. They want to work somewhere that matters. They want to make a difference. They want what they do to mean something kind of big picture. And so from the Home Depot perspective, they invested in upskilling, in raises, in skills development to keep those employees in place. Because if you don't have them, you don't have profit. You're going to be in a smidge of trouble. So I absolutely agree with the sentiment. CEOs care about money. CFOs are even worse, right? Because it's literally their job. The challenge is making data based on the full set of information that we have, and keeping in mind that it's not the only thing to think about, this financial aspect.
Thank you. And thank you for that comment. I don't see anything else in the chat. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up a few minutes early. You will also see in our upcoming email with the presentation recording our next webinar registration link, which is on preventing, mitigating, and responding to violence in the rural hospital setting. So we hope to see you all again next month. Thank you for your time today and see you next time. Bye. Thanks, Dr. Pace. We appreciate you.
Thank y'all.